to Migrate, initiated by International Refugee Rights Association. This is Gizem, and today we are going to talk about reasons and consequences of migration flow triggered by Afghanistan. Now, we are happy to host Gülnaz Yücel, who is studying migration and environmental safety in Afghanistan for her master's thesis. Hello, Mrs. Gülnaz.
Hello, Mrs. Gizem.
Thanks for accepting our invitation. With your permission, I would like to start with the first question.
Okay.
What do you think lies deep within the migrants in Afghanistan? Who are the actors that triggered the crisis?
The reason behind the migrants in Afghanistan is the years of conflict and the resulting economic crisis. Since the Soviet invasion in 1979, more than 40 years of occupation, internal conflicts, and foreign interventions have made Afghanistan a country that has been at war for many years. First major migration from Afghanistan took place in 1979 with Soviet occupation, which ended in 1989. The ideological rivalry over Afghanistan during the Cold War caused the countries of the region support ethnic groups and this parental conflict. At the beginning of 1981, about 3.7 million Afghan refugees fled Iran and Pakistan. Pakistan and Iran became the main target countries for Afghan migrants due to their geographical, religious, social, and cultural proximity. More distant migrant migration of Afghans was rare, while permanent and circular migration took place between these countries and Afghanistan. This past life left Afghanistan a third country with a population of 18 million after the 1979 Soviet intervention. Besides conflicts, another notable cause of migration was the drought in 1990s. Following these droughts and conflicts, 6.2 million Afghan refugees were displaced in 1990. In 1992, inter-Mujahideen conflicts led to the second emigration in Afghanistan. Subsequently, the Taliban came to power, claiming to protect the post-conflict environment and ensure stability. However, this caused him to flee from anti-Taliban Afghanistan. The migration caused by the rise of the Taliban consisted primarily of large groups such as Hazaras, Sikh, and Hindus, who most likely represented women and youths. In the second wave of external migration, especially the urban and educated middle class led from Afghanistan to Iran and Pakistan. While Taliban was in power, Al-Qaeda, headed by Osama bin Laden, was given shelter in Afghanistan. In 2001, Al-Qaeda carried out attacks in United States. On this, the cell in which the USA began to rise invaded Afghanistan to overthrow the Taliban and fight terrorism, alleged a history of support of Osama bin Laden. The war between coalition forces and the Taliban has resulted in their and largest migration. The attacks of September 11, 2001 led to an increased interest in Afghanistan in the international community. Contrary to expectations, the USA intervention in Afghanistan did not cause serious migration movements. The reason for this that Iran and Pakistan closed their borders to Afghan refugees, and the Taliban power was overthrown in a very short time. However, the migration mobility of Afghans continued in this period despite the qualitative difference. Attitudes toward this mobility have been at a different level than in previous periods. So what are these quantitative and qualitative differences? Many years of instability in this base country continued even after the Taliban left power. Foreign aid due to corruption was not distributed fairly. Infrastructure and development failed. Drug production and consumption increased as employment was not provided. People continued to suffer economically. There are different reasons for migration in terms of the nature of these effects. Because the main purpose of people here is to live in prosperity and peace along with surviving. However, the main purpose of those who migrated during the conflict is to survive. Quantitatively, the marriage took place intentionally and collectively in a short time during the conflict. However, the process that began with the American occupation following the fall of the Taliban had spread conflicts so far and into space. As there was no total battlefight, the region moved into a different area of conflict. It happens more frequently in some places and less frequently in others. This showed that the people who migrated were only due to the conflicts. Migrations after 2001 generally took place in small group over times. We see examples of mass migrations, individual migrations, and migrations of small creatures. Also, the conflicts in this period intensified in 2006 and the migrations of Afghanistan in 2021, the Taliban come back to power. This situation gave rise to the idea that the Taliban would once again rule their government oppressively and administratively. With the coming power of the Taliban, anti-Taliban opponents, women who thought that the leadership of work and education would be taken over, and some Afghans who thought the economic crisis would deepen left the country. This was one of the most intense migrations after 2001. With the arrival of the US continent also say that the conflict is between Daesh and the Taliban. That means that Afghanistan still does not have total security. While life has improved for some Afghans, nearly half of the population still live below the poverty line. More than a quarter of a million people remain internally displaced by conflicts, and nearly 3 million remain in Pakistan and Iran. Human rights violations, such as the individual experience of war, forced labor, abduction, insecurity, widespread poverty, political instability, and poor education have reduced hopes for a better future and increased migration. For those reasons, it will continue to be the only option for many Afghans unless there are policies that diminish the key drivers of migrations.
Okay, thank you. And the second question would be, why does Afghanistan represent an essential example of environmental security?
Natural disasters are another significant cause of migration, especially in the last 10 years. Consecutive droughts have caused forced migration to urban areas for economic reasons. The reasons for displacement can be expressed not only as conflict, but also as a lack of food, underemployment, increasingly arid rural areas, and increased flooding after long droughts. Afghanistan is divided into three different topographically. The Hindu Kush Mountains divide the country into three very different parts: altitude, natural resource, and climate. The first of these, the region dominated by high mountains in the middle of country. The second is the region dominated by plateaus in the south of the country. The third is the region of flatlands in north of the country, located in the center of the country and dominated by high mountains. The area has a very warm climate in summer and a very cold climate in winter. Its topography is semi-desert, steppe, and non-arable. As a result, different seasons such as natural climates and seasonal conditions, landslides, and weather conditions cause migration. The plateau region in the south of the country consists of barren lands and high plateaus with several streams. Although the climate of this region is mild, it's not suitable for agriculture production due to the low rainfall. The plain area in the north consists of highlands with grasslands and fertile lands. This topographic feature ensures that the climate in the region is mild. In the region receives precipitation, making the region suitable for agriculture. For this reason, this region is described as the center of agriculture for Afghanistan. As can be seen, Afghanistan has a very difficult geographical structure, and this difficult structure can be shown as one of the important factors in migration of poor people. It also causes different economic conditions and vulnerabilities between regions to vary. Their regions have different environmental security risks. In general, the point that separates Afghanistan from other countries in term environmental security is the cultural length of the country. Persons 80 of which lives in the countryside makes up only persons 11 of the country's surface. This situation causes serious food insecurity and economic inequality in the country. In addition to these natural conditions, it also has an infrastructure that has been destroyed by conflict for many years. The fact that the wealth in the country is not shared fairly and that it is an underdeveloped country makes it more vulnerable to environmental security risks. The country doesn't have the power to address these environmental security risks, nor does it have the proper means to produce compliance policies.
Well, the Taliban has many phases. Are we talking about a separate Taliban for each period? When you evaluate it in its historical context, what effect could the Taliban have in Afghanistan as a country of migration?
It wouldn't be right to say that the Taliban have many different phases. However, it can be periodized. Between 1996 and 2001, the Taliban were more radical in their interpretation of Islam and organized social life accordingly. It had an attitude that equated modernization with Westernism. This situation had thrown it into a rigid traditionalism that lacked the possibilities of modernization. However, when we look at the social roles, it didn't allocate the social and economic opportunities that men have to women. There was a situation where the woman was confined to home, isolated from education and social life. When we look it politically, we saw that after Taliban captured Kabul, it was not accepted by the international system and could not meet the expectation, even though it tried to see it. Today, Taliban is accepted both politically and economically by Russia, China, and Gulf countries. Although it is still not recognized as a legitimate power, it conducts diplomatic negotiations. It tries to integrate with the international system and global markets. From a social point of view, we can say that it has a more moderate and social service oriented structure. It works on issues such as the fight against drugs, financial support for the poor, and the protection of the environment. However, discrimination against women in education and working life continues. It maintains its pre-2001 stance on issues such as stopping women's university education and prohibiting women and men from receiving coalitions and co-education. This social discrimination, especially the treatment of women, causes the migration of families who want women and girls to get an education and enter working life. While escaping from the war environment in one, the security risks posed by the social structure are avoided in other. This shows that the situation of displacement due to conflict has changed and has evolved into a state of asylum due to its political views and membership of a certain group. In other words, instead of talking about a massive migration, when the Taliban come to power, we can say that anti-Taliban individuals and small groups took refuge.
Okay, like we see that those who immigrated from Afghanistan to Turkey are mostly men. What do you think is the reason for this?
If your country is a country of underemployment and war, you have two options to support your family. One is to become a mercenary by joining armed organizations, and the other is to migrate and work and send money to your family. Especially in Afghanistan, before the Soviet occupation in 1979, some Afghan men went to work in Iran due to the poor economic situation in the country. This situation is still very common today. It is still common for young men in the family to go to the Iran or other countries to support their families. However, we see that men don't want to worry about them while trying to immigrate with their families and establish order, so they leave them in Afghanistan. There is no hope that job opportunities will improve, as international aid to Afghanistan is not transferred to sustainable projects and is wasted due to corruption, which puts in the economic employment in the country into crisis. It will be more difficult to do this in a foreign country, as the duty of caring for children and elderly people in the family is given to women. Since the livelihood of the household is given to men in Afghanistan, the man wants to have at least enough capital to start a business when he returns to his country, although not permanently. When we look at young and single men, we can see that they were sent by their families to go to abroad and earn money instead of their fathers. In other words, generally young, single, unemployed Afghan men migrate for economic reasons.
Thank you, Mrs. Gülnaz. That was my last question. Is there anything you would like to add?
No, thank you.
Okay then, thank you again for your valuable contribution. Dear listeners, this is the end of today's episode. This is Gizem and Gülnaz Yücel. Our topic was different aspects of migration process triggered by Afghanistan. Thank you for listening. See you next time in Roads to Migrate.